Hello, today's Bible study comes from Acts chapter 17, verses 1 through 9, and reads as follows. When Paul and his companions had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah, he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women. But other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house to search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here, and Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are all defying Caesar's decree, saying that there is another king, one called Jesus." When they heard this, the crowd and the city officials were thrown into turmoil. Then they made Jason and the others post bond and let them go. Well, this starts with Paul and Silas going to Thessalonica, and Paul and his companions, and it was more than just Silas, don't forget. And they were traveling, had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia. They came up to Thessalonica, and there was a Jewish synagogue there. And what was the custom of Paul? Paul went to the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the scriptures. Paul was teaching them from the scriptures, and he was explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. He's explaining to them that this was part of Jesus' destiny. This is the things that he had to go through in order to be here. And he was telling them this information from the word itself. And Paul was emphasizing this. He said, hey, this Jesus I preach to you is the Christ. And he tells them what he did for us. He suffered and he rose again from the dead. Paul walked them through Jesus' life, more than likely telling them of the suffering, and probably right up to, and not even probably, right up to the resurrection. And he was proclaiming this message and telling them, this Jesus I am proclaiming, he is the Messiah, he said. And it moved some of the Jews who were persuaded to join Paul and Silas. Once again, the word just being spoken. As did a large number of God-fearing Greeks. Some Greeks came. And you can tell they were in a Greek area by the names of Amphipolis and Apollonia. But quite a few prominent women also joined. But don't forget, remember, Paul also had help when he was in Thessalonica. And it tells you when Paul was in Thessalonica in Philippians 4:15 and 16. Now, you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in Thessalonica, you sent aid once and again for my necessities. That's the New King James Version. But even with that being said, there was still jealousy. There were Jews who were not persuaded. They were mad, envious because of what was happening, and they did some bad things. They went and got some bad characters from the market and made a mob. Wow. Formed a mob, and they started a riot in the city. Not Paul, not Silas, not anybody in this group. They rushed to Jason's house, and they speak of Jason. He was just a Christian in Thessalonica who was extending courtesies to other Christians. So they rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas. in order to bring them out up to the crowd. But when they got to Jason's house, Paul and Silas, they weren't there. So what did they do? They dragged Jason. They got him and some of the believers and brought them before the city officials, and they was going crazy. And it tells you these men have caused trouble all over the world, not just here, but all over the world. Have now come here. They here now. And Jason, he welcomed them. He welcomed them into his house. Now, Jason, just a Christian, believing Christian, extending courtesies. Jason's doing what he's supposed to do. And in my mind, Jason wasn't going to give up doing what he was going to do. Jason stayed firm because he let them take him. No problem. And then they said, they are all defying Caesar's decrees. And this was bad in their eyes because these are all acting contrary to what Caesar has said. When they said there is another king, and there is another king. And this is a serious accusation to be brought up about going against Caesar. And when they heard this, it angered them, made them mad. And it really made them mad because of lack of knowledge. It seemed like they thought that this Jesus was coming to wage war against Caesar and take over the lands of Rome and become the king there. Excuse me, but that's not what they were talking about. But when you don't know him, you don't know him. And these fears scared the heck out of them. But truth of the matter was, that's not what they were saying. Although he is King of Kings, Jesus wasn't coming there to have war with them. So what they do when they heard this, the crowd and the city officials were thrown into turmoil. They freaked out. Then they made Jason and the others post bond and let them go. So it sounds like they were incarcerated in some form, shape, or fashion because they had to pay to get their freedom. And Jason posted it and the others post bond and they were let go of. And we'll continue tomorrow. I think we'll be going to Barrera. Amen.